A top Kremlin aide says an agreement has now been reached for President Donald Trump to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in, quote, the coming days. The president's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, just met with Putin in Moscow yesterday to continue discussions around bringing an end to Russia's war in Ukraine. I want to play for you what President Trump said about that meeting.
We had some very good talks with President Putin today. And there's a very good chance that we could be ending the end of that road. That road was long and continues to be long, but there's a good chance that there will be a meeting very soon.
Now, tomorrow marks President Trump's self-imposed deadline, another deadline for Russia. An ultimatum of sorts: agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine or face what could be crippling new sanctions, the so-called secondary sanctions that would hit countries that buy Russian oil with a 100% tariff. The president's already slapped an additional 25% on India, which is a big purchaser of Russian energy, for the penalty as punishment for continuing to buy Russian oil and gas. And the president has also threatened that China could be next. Let's talk about this. Joining us right now is Sir William Browder. He's the founder and CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, a prominent Putin critic, and also the head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign and author of Red Notice and Freezing Order. It's good to see you again. So the exact reporting from Russian state media around this coming meeting, they say, is as follows. An agreement has been reached for Donald Trump to meet his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, quote, in the coming days, and the parties have begun working on preparations. The president's also suggested that this meeting could happen as early as next week. Why do you think Putin wants this meeting, and what do you think it means as the president, it really means as the president is trying to broker an end to this war?
Well, I don't think that Putin particularly wants this meeting, and much more importantly, I don't think Putin wants to end this war. He's shown no signs up till now of in any way diminishing his ambitions for in his mind, a total victory over Ukraine. And so I think that all this focus on process, on meetings, on different types of negotiations all misses the point. The point is that Putin started this war, and at no time has he ever wanted to end this war. And as much as President Trump has said he wants to end the war in 24 hours, end the war in 6 months, end the war next month, have a meeting next week, Putin doesn't want to end the war. And so one of two things has to happen. Either Trump says, you know what, I don't care about that war anymore, or Trump has to follow through and actually get tough on Russia. And having a meeting doesn't particularly get us any closer to that if Putin doesn't want to budge.
You've been skeptical of President Trump's commitment and ability, I guess, really, to sway Putin in any way and force him to actually negotiate an end here. This new escalation that the President Trump is heading towards, doubling tariffs on India as a penalty for buying Russian oil. What do you think of this approach?
Well, I think this is actually the key approach. So at the moment, Putin has one big source of money, and that is the sale of oil. Who's buying his oil? China, India, and Turkey. And so if we want to stop him from continuing this war, we need to take away that money. And to take away that money, the best way to do that is to punish China, India, and Turkey. And so if he actually does that, if he actually says, I'm going to put really tough tariffs, and he doesn't have to do it on the whole country, he could just do it on the refineries that buy it, so they don't want to buy it anymore, that would do the trick. Will he follow through? He seems to have done so with India. Where's China in this thing? We don't know yet. Where's Turkey? Will he leave these tariffs on India? There's a lot more to be discussed with India other than just the war in Ukraine. If he doesn't, then it works. Then it actually works. That is the thing that Putin cares about. And Putin he's doing a game of chicken. He's saying, is Trump really going to follow through on this stuff? Trump has a history of making various extreme threats and then not following through. I think Putin is hoping that he can somehow charm Trump into delaying, and then Putin can carry on with this war.
I was actually going to ask you that because of this deadline tomorrow that Trump has said. I mean, Russia either agrees to a ceasefire, or then the question becomes, Or else, and we can play it out, I guess, on two paths, as you were just kind of pointing to. Trump actually sticks with it and follows through on the threat, and that does what? Or on the flip side, though, if President Trump punts once again, gives Putin more time, which I don't know what this meeting next week would actually, if that's what this would kind of come across as or effectively be, not following through with the threat yet again, what impact is that going to have?
Well, it just if that were to happen, and I sincerely hope it doesn't happen, it gives Putin the green light to carry on, and it ruins Trump's credibility at making these threats. And it's like, if you declare that you have a red line, if you're the United States of America and you say here's a red line, if you cross it, then these things will happen, and then you don't follow through on these things happening, then your credibility is shot. And we've seen this happen before. There was Obama. When he was president, had a red line in Syria. The Syrians crossed it, and he didn't follow through. And so there's many examples of these types of red lines. And I sincerely hope that we don't have the same thing happen here and now, because Putin will then just do what he wants to do and carry on with his war, which is what he wants to do.
Yeah. Sir William Browder, it's always good to see you. Thank you so much for coming in.
So let's bring in Anne Applebaum, staff writer for The Atlantic and author of the book Autocracy, Inc. And she joins us this hour from Poland. Appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.
So US President Donald Trump told European leaders Wednesday he intends to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin very soon, potentially as early as next week, followed by a trilateral meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky after his top envoy Steve Witkoff met with Putin for 3 hours. Trump called the meeting highly productive and appears confident that he'll end the war in Ukraine. So what did you make of all of this, and what was actually accomplished here?
So, of course, I don't know what was said in the private meetings. So stipulate I didn't have access to that. I would be very careful, though, because remember, Vladimir Putin has never said in public that he wants to end the war now. In other words, he's never said that he's given up on his main goal. And his main goal is the destruction of Ukraine, the incorporation of Ukraine into some kind of Russian empire or state. The removal of the Ukrainian government and changing it for a pro-Russian government. And he's never given up those goals. In fact, very recently, in the last month or two, he said once again, anywhere where there has ever been a Russian soldier, that territory belongs to Russia, or could belong to Russia again. And of course, that includes Berlin. So he hasn't made any public gesture at all. And in fact, at the same time, the United States has had a very uneven and unpredictable policy, which from the Russian point of view looks unserious. So, for example, even while President Trump is talking about new sanctions, the old sanctions, the sanctions that were laid on by the Biden administration that were designed to prevent parts and components for the Russian weapons industry from getting into Russia, these are being gradually lifted because they require constant updating and constant renewing. There was a congressional report earlier this week pointing out exactly that. So it's actually fairly murky. It's not clear whether the Russians think there's a real challenge from the United States or not.
Right, and as we just heard, of course, Ukraine's President Zelensky responded to these developments by saying that Russia seems more inclined toward a ceasefire and that the pressure on Moscow is working. But Zelensky warned not to be deceived by Russia. What do you say to all of that?
Well, I mean, of course, Ukrainians, and not just the Ukrainians, have a lot of experience of Russians saying one thing, or Putin in particular saying one thing and then doing something else. So any public statement would have to be taken with a grain of salt. Any announced ceasefire would have to have some kind of enforcement mechanism. And any plan to end the war would also have to include some kind of security guarantee for Ukraine, because the Ukrainians know that the war could start up again at any moment. But again, Putin has not said that he wants the war to end, and certainly he has not said that he wants it to end on the current, the current front line. He and people around him are still repeating their main goals as they have done for the last 3 years.